So good morning, good afternoon, however this lecture finds you. And the parsha that we're going to be talking about will be Parshas Nosa. And the parsha starts off with Nosa Esresh B'nai Gershon Gamheim. The verse says that we need to do an accounting of the people of B'nai Gershon. So that's interesting because our previous Parsha, in Parsha Bamidbar, also did accounting of the people. And in fact, of the tribe of Levi, so there was a general populace counting, and then Hashem said that the tribe of Levi, which is the tribe which is associated with doing things and preparing and doing things in the temple and going to do things for God associated to God. So they're going to be counted as separate because Hashem says in the verse, they are mine. Now that count goes over two parshas, which is Parshas Bamidbar and Parshas Nosa. So then the Parsha of Nosa, that is the weekly portion, which is called Nosa, starts in the first verses, says you should count the people of the clan of Gershon, and also they. Now, because of that verse and the way it's structured, that lends itself a discussion, which we'll be focusing on. So in chapter 4, verse 22, we find that we have the three different clans of Levi enunciated. They're written and enunciated as the heads of the clans of the tribe of Levi, and they're called Gershon, Kothath, Merari, and they're counted first in a way of their birth order. That is, as we just said, first the sons of Levi was Gershon, then the son came of Kothath, and then the name Merari. Okay, so in this week's parsha, we come to the counting of Gershon, which is the second counting, but not the counting according to the way they actually were asked to do service to Hashem, because the service to Hashem was mentioned differently. When we talk about that they are to serve for Hashem, Kothath is mentioned first, and then comes Gershon and then Merari. So in the previous parsha, in Bamidbar, in chapter 3, verses 15 and 16, and then further when we mention Gershon and Merari, and that is because, and our verse tells us, or our teachers tells us, that the service that the Gershon had, that the Kothath tribe did, was with the direct implements of the Mishkan and of the temple. They carried the ark and other implements, the menorah, etc., of the sanctuary structure, while Gershon and Merari were infrastructure people that they carried the beams and the curtains which were going to carry the Mishkan. So primarily, as the way the parshas are divided, Kothath has already been counted. This week's parsha starts off talking about Gershon and saying that they need to be counted also. So the structure of that verse lends itself to trying to understand. It appears out of the verse, although Gershon is actually the Becher, meaning he is the firstborn, and in a regular context, we find that the firstborns are mentioned first. In the context of service in the temple, they are mentioned second, and seem to be and seems that they are doing a secondary task, meaning that they're carrying the beams, and therefore that's why the verse finishes off with saying also them, implying that the main section of them is the Kothath, but also Gershon and Merari will eventually come into play. So it looks like, or we're given the impression that Gershon, from their own point of view, from their own aspects, are somewhat secondary to the Kothath clan. All three are in the tribe of Levi, but it seems that Gershon has been given a secondary place, as well as they were counted first. Now, because of the strength of these questions, we find that that the commentary of the Medrash asks that question and says, why is that so? So it seems that the answer that it's given is that it's because Kothath, the clan of Kothath, have been appointed to carry, as we mentioned previously, the holier items. That is the place where the luchos, where the tablets of stone were placed, as well as the other implements of the Mishkan, being the menorah and the altar, etc. But the Medrash then sort of asks the question and implies and says, it appears that Gershon is somewhat put into the back. So on the back, why is that? So the Medrash answers, it's not because they are of lesser stature, but because they had been appointed to carry the tablets of stone. The tablets of stone inherently is the Torah, because the Torah is the wisdom of Hashem, the wisdom of the Lord. Therefore, in honor of the Torah, they were appointed first, and other parts in terms of the assembly of the temple, etc. Kothath is giving the primacy. So this idea of the primacy of Kothath is due to the ark more than something differentiated in themselves. Now, embedded in the word of counting is another idea. The other idea of Nosa implies the idea of lifting up, of elevation. So, therefore, if you can read the verse as when they were counted, as the idea of that Kothath is to be lifted, and we can understand by virtue of the Torah that they were carrying, they were automatically elevated. And therefore, our implicit question that we sort of mentioned before, why does the verse say that Gershon needs to be, we translate it as the Gershon has to be counted also them? If we use the expression or the idea that embedded in this word, Nosa means to lift up, we say that Gershon, the clan of Gershon, needs to be lifted up, not just Kothath, but also they, Gershon, will get an elevation via this counting process. So to understand this in a deeper, more mystical sense, we can go and investigate the idea of what is and what is the singularity about the tribe of Levi. So, in the original time of the birth of Jacob's son, when Levi was born, his mother called him Levi, which Yalava, it's Yalava Isha Eli. My husband will be connected to me via my son. He will be joined with me, and it is explained in Hasidus that this idea of being joined by virtue of this son, I will have a person that's associated with my husband. Now, in classical understanding, in Kabbalistic senses, we talk about that there is a relationship between Hashem and his people, the nation Israel. And Israel is treated as the bride. Hashem is treated as the bridegroom. And at Matan Torah, at the beginning of the Torah, through the Torah, and by virtue of the Torah, Hashem has connected and connects and continually connects to the Jewish people. So this idea of joining together that Levi represents, the idea of joining together, I will make a union with my husband, or I'm joined further with my husband, that this idea of Levi, the inherent mystical connections of Levi, is that the Levi is the one that causes a joining, a togetherness between the people, between the bride and the bridegroom, and we can understand that's via the Torah itself, and this union is a union which is a very deep. It's a union is deep, and as expressed by the Tanya, when we learn God's Torah, we draw God's wisdom into us, and we become one. When we understand the teachings of the Torah, we become one with Hashem. So if we examine this idea of the general tribe of Levi, that this is what Levi does. Levi is the union between Hashem and the Jewish people, or enhances or causes that union to be stronger. We find that within we now know, and we've mentioned, that the tribe of Levi has 3 clans. Those 3 clans, as we mentioned, right? Levi had 3 sons, what's called Gershon, Kothath, Merari. That's the birth order. So the idea of the birth order means that from birth one goes from baby, childhood to adulthood. This idea, these names of the birth order that signifies a growth, signifies the idea of that a person can go through personal growth. How do you go through this process of personal growth? By implementing the mystical idea that's embedded in the 3 names, that is, in the names of Gershon, Kothath, Merari. So what is the understanding of those names? What is the understanding, the mystical understanding of Gershon, Kothath, Levi? We have a teaching that as a person wants to unite with Hashem, a person has to purify themselves and become more an appropriate vessel to connect with Hashem. The process of connecting to Hashem is through the understandings of what's embedded in those three names in that birth order, because in the birth order, that's how a person grows from the first appearance into the world to and maturing through one stage to the highest level of advancement. So when a person wants to approach holiness and to join with the Kedusha, the holiness of Hashem, and connect to Hashem, person has to do the types of service that's embedded in the three clans of Levi. Now, interestingly, and as an aside, the Rambam, the great sage Maimonides, teacher of Torah, when he describes the tribe of Levi, says that although it was and is a specific tribe, but any person, he says, that the Levi isn't just a Levi and it could only confine to someone who comes from the tribe of Levi, but a person can emulate or implement the service that a Levi does. That means that every single person, when he wants to come close to Hashem and serve Hashem, like the Levim did in the temple, can purify themselves through the process of Levi. That is to say, any person who feels he's got the spirit that wants to bring himself closer to serve Hashem, can be a Levi, and he can become close and stand in front of Hashem to serve Hashem by being a Levi, and he can make himself and purify himself to the extent of the holy of holies, and he can become purified to be able to serve in front of Hashem. But in particular, the tribe of Levi were particularly designated for that. But this is something which, in a spiritual sense, any person, any Jewish person can achieve. So that behooves us to ask us, what does this mean? What does it mean to be a Gershon person, to be a Kothath person, and to be a Merari type of a person? So they represent, those three clans represent three stages in self-refinement to come close to Hashem. And they are approximated, or they're given the term, the Gershon process, Kothath process, Merari process. That is to say, in the first beginnings of a person coming close to Hashem, a person has to do the Gershon activity. So now the name Gershon is word related to the idea of gerish. Gerish means to push away, separate from. The idea here being to expel. The idea here being to expel the negativity, expel the negativity in a person, whether we're talking about negativity of spirit, or negativity of thought, or negativity of action, or emotions. The idea of separating and pushing and pushing that away. And further, it's in a more deeper sense, it means to move himself from remove from him, his, her, himself, the nature that a person says, I can make do with this activity. I do good, but this is good enough for me. A person Gershon has to push away that feeling of what I do is sufficient, I shouldn't do anything more. A person should push away the feeling from himself that he says, oh, this is what I'm used to, so I can't do any more. Person should Gershon, he should expel the notion from himself that what I do and my nature is second nature to me, and that's my nature, and I don't have to go further. Oh, in fact, a person needs to move himself from one stage to the next stage, as it says about Moses, that when Moses saw the burning bush on the mountain, that is to say, just going back again, if we're not familiar with the story, that when Moses was shepherding the sheep of his father-in-law, Hashem had decided that it was time that he was sent on his mission to take the Jews out of Egypt. He appeared in a burning bush. Moses saw this burning bush on the mountaintop while he was shepherding the sheep, and he moved himself towards this burning bush. The verse says he removed himself from there and he went to the burning bush. The deeper teaching in that is that he removed himself from anything which wasn't positive holy and moved himself closer to holiness. And this is the idea of Gershon. Gershon implies that we remove ourselves from anything negative or even good things, but when they're not done with sufficient intention for Hashem, and we remove our slothfulness and move ourselves to a higher order, right? And be more active in coming close to Hashem. And this movement, there's no limit to it. A person can always move ahead and make himself better, herself better, and further themselves and making themselves closer to the level of spirituality, telling ourselves that whatever I did yesterday was sufficient, but for today I'm a better person. I'm a better level, and therefore I want to move myself ahead to go to the next stage, in my life, and move ahead. And we're not, and as I'm emphasizing, we're not necessarily talking about anything not good. We're talking about even aspects which a person is positive. And for sure, if a person's doing something negative against Hashem or against Hashem's commandments, we're for sure talking about that. But we're talking even further. Even a person is doing positive things, but a person can do them in a more beautiful, more introspective, a more achieved level. And what was good enough for yesterday isn't necessarily good enough for today, and we have to move ahead. So that's the idea of Gershon, the idea of purifying the person themselves and making whatever he did, whatever she does, and making it certainly moving away from anything real negative and making them positive in the dimensions that we talked about, in our thought processes, in our emotions and our actions, with ourselves and to our fellow man and to God. So that's the idea. So that's the idea of Gershon. That's step one in the process. We'll move on to step two. It is said from the first Levite Rebbe that I know, he told one chassid, he told one of his followers that in relationship to a person's service in a way of doing it in a regular fashion and not moving on or so, and I apologize to anyone who's listening who might potentially get somewhat offended by this statement, that he said, well, even the animals in the courtyard they're grazing and they don't move ahead too much. But we're not allowed, but that's the nature of an animal. But we are human beings, so we need to progress. We need to move ahead. Animals, the cow in the pasture, he just does the normal thing. He expects the grass in the field, and that's what he's moving ahead. But we have to move ahead and hence even our good, all our positive and good attributes, they have to be intentionally and meaningfully moving ahead. That is to say that even the good deeds that we do shouldn't necessarily be moved and changed because we feel good about it, that we need to feel good, and therefore even more good. If I give charity to a good cause and I do something positive, it makes me feel good. Person should go another step and move ahead on that, not just because he'll make that person feel a little bit better, but the intensity of the demand is that because God is asking us to do better. And if I do it because God is asking me to do better, then in that case, I'm serving God. But let's move ahead to the next clan. The next clan is called Kothath. And we said Kothath is honored by being mentioned first in terms of their service to Hashem because of the Torah. Why is that? Because what word do we see, or how do we see that implicated by the verse? The name Kothath actually means to, or can be translated to mean to collect, to put together, to gather together. That is, a person should gather together their specific energies and special characteristics. In fact, every Jew, every single person has got his 10 components that make his neshama up, as we've discussed in the Sphira Sa'ema, and as we've learned on the mystical side that in each neshama, in each soul, there are these 10 keiches hanefesh, the 10 capabilities of the soul, which in general we talk about Meichen being Chabad, the thinking processes, intelligence. We talk about the emotion aspects, and we talk about action, and they can also be related and enclosed in the neshama's capabilities, the soul's capabilities of machshava, dibur, and maisa, meaning machshava, thought processes, how you communicate to yourself, which that is thought processes in your mind, midas or dibur, how you might talk to your emotions, and then in action, that's how you speak to others, because a person is measured by his actions that he takes to others. So the idea of the Kothath is that a person should join together and integrate his capabilities in order to serve Hashem in the service of understanding God's will through his Torah. So Kothath was honored by holding and transporting the ark, which represents the Torah, as well as the other implements of the Mishkan, including the menorah, when the menorah is a 7-branched candelabra, which refers to the 7 or the 6, being precise, the 6 motions and the action, the actions, the 6 midos, the 6 emotive aspects, which we've learned together presumably the people who are listening who have learned aspects of the Tanya where that's explained, and the action involved in the doing of the mitzvahs. So a person has to. So the idea of kahos is that a person joins together with his knowledge, with his learnings and connectings of Hashem and Hashem's desired outcomes. And then we'll move on to the third clan. The third clan was called Merari. Now the name Merari if we look at the word Merari, even though it was his name, we can see embedded a word called Mar. Mar is like if we remember the one of the foods that we eat on Pesach is called mora, which is the bitter herbs. There is bitterness, so Merari has got to do with the idea of bitterness. But what bitterness? What bitterness? Bitterness. This is the bitterness of the soul, that when the person's not satisfied with where he's up to, and he has bitterness inside of himself that he wants to come closer, and that he hasn't come close to godliness in a sufficient manner. That is to say, we're not talking about depression, chas v'sholom. We're not talking about negativity. We're talking about that a person when he's done his efforts in the style of Gershon. He's abandoned negative ways. He's taken on positive ways, and in a way that it's not of moving ahead in a way of moving forward in this best possible way. And a person's utilized the kahos in inside himself, that he's brought together all the Torah and mitzvahs that he understands, and he still finds that he still wants to come even further close. Remember, Levi is the idea of becoming close, as we mentioned initially, right? That he wants to come even closer, that he has bitterness of soul, that he is not close enough, and he can go even further, and he wants to move himself to a more higher level of spiritual connection to Hashem, and this is driving the person, that he's not satisfied with the Gershon activity that he's done, and he's not satisfied with himself with the kahos activity that's inside himself, and he's driving himself. He's mar, not in a negative sense, as I said. He's bitter, but that's driving himself forward to develop even further capabilities within inside of himself in the previously two mentioned levels, because he didn't get to the ultimate connection and zone that he wants to be with Hashem. So therefore he's got the level of Meriras. And therefore this is the understanding of the growth pattern, the maturation of a person's connection to himself in the way of the birth order, through the birth order of the names Gershon, Kothath, and Merari. Now, this is further emphasized by another aspect in the clan of Levi. So once we've talked about the order of maturation of a person's service of Hashem, represented by Levi being the desire, as his name is, to come and serve to Hashem, close to Hashem. We find that, and we found that an understanding by virtue of their names, a process of maturation that that we'll go through in order to achieve it. But ultimately, we see that the place that where we want to be is in the service of Kothath, because actually the service, the style of Gershon, is essentially a introduction or a precursor to the Kothath type of service. Because in general, we talk about, like I mentioned about Moses, our activity is Sumera v'aseh. We have to separate from negativity and work towards the positivity. And then the ultimate purpose of all of this is that our service has to be doing the good. So as we've been continuing and talking, but the ultimate purpose of everything is the Kothath, that is to join through the doing of the positive. After all, it says, Sumera v'aseh. This is what Moses' activity was. It was move away from your regular, what he was with the sheep at that time, and come close to the burning bush. That is, come closer to the godliness. So ultimately, Kothath is the ultimate purpose of the service that we're doing. As is given an example, that when a person wants to build one person wants to build a building, and he has to put all his bits and pieces in place, the first thing you need to do is to clean up your existing building, to take away any of the dirt or dust or whatever there might be in there, and afterwards put all the beautiful things in your house, in your building. In the same way, when we in the service of man to God, the first thing that you have to do is clean up the person from whatever negative strains that a person still might have attached to them. Clean that away, and then move positively in the actions of doing good, and that's the idea of fixing and organizing any of a person's vessels, fixing up his machshava, his thoughts, his dibur, his speech, his actions in a pleasant way, so that your physical area and your spiritual area, that is in your immediate surroundings, and then further your external surroundings, from the microcosm to the macrocosm, becomes a place of doing good, and becomes a beautiful dwelling place. Like we use the expression that doing the service of Hashem makes a dwelling place for God below. So from this is understood that the most important activity ultimately of organizing the vessels and making them in a nice way, that's what Kothath did. Kothath was the one who organized the vessels in the particular place, because after the Jews were marching in the wilderness, when they came to any particular stop, the infrastructure was put up, and then the beautiful vessels, which included the menorah, the menorah, the mizbeach, the altar, and the ark were put into place, which was done by the clan of Kothath, because after all, that was the service of Kothath. But before anything could be done, the Gershon and the activity had to happen. Therefore, each person inside of themselves has to go through that Gershon activity to expel any negative aspects. So that's why in growth, Gershon has to, in growth aspects, in birth order, Gershon has to come first, as we said, because that's the nature of a person's birth. However, when we talk about a person's service to Hashem, we talk about that the main thing being Kothath, that Kothath is the one who we translated originally Nosa, meaning to count, but in relationship to elevation and what happens to elevated, Kothath comes first. So therefore, Kothath, the clan of Kothath was counted first because they are the ultimate purpose of the service. That is the service of Torah mitzvahs, even though of course you need the Gershon activity in before that. So, and then the other thing that we mentioned was that the beginning of this week's Parsha got that expression of gam haim. That is, when you count when we all count Gershon, also them, and we said that the idea of the also them seems to imply some sort of a smaller thing. The idea of the gam haim also them means, but something else, or we want to give it another meaning. That is, by virtue of the activity of Kothath, right? Then also gam haim, Gershon will be elevated. Meaning, to explicate that a little bit more, by virtue of doing the Kothath activity of learning Torah and doing the mitzvahs, whatever negativity that might be within us, that is what we haven't successfully Gershonized, to utilize an English and Hebrew word together, whatever we haven't expelled, nevertheless, by virtue of our Torah and mitzvahs that we've done, Gershon becomes elevated as well. Gershon, in an automatic way, will become elevated, because when you're in the environment of Kothath, when you're in the environment of Torah mitzvahs and doing all the positive activity, then automatically gam haim, meaning also them, Gershon also gets elevated. Gershon also gets affected. Gershon also will become elevated. Perhaps not in the most intense manner as Kothath does, but certainly in some sort of external way, as we see as we see in general. If you hang around, we'll come to another parsha. We'll speak more about that. But the people, it says that the people who are encamped closer to the temple, they weren't involved in so much arguments, while the other ones, while other people which were connected to Korach, when we come to the portion of Korach, were swept into a rebellion. We get affected by the neighborhood, by the people, by the environment we're in. If we can be in the environment of Kothath, we're dragged along in a positive sense. We're moved ahead. In the mystical concepts, we relate that to the level of Ketzer, and Kothath, being Torah, refers to the inner part of Ketzer, the highest spiritual revelations, and Gershon refers to a more outer, external version of Kothath. But each one is affected by the other, and each one gets an elevation. That is, Gershon gets an elevation by virtue of Kothath, and therefore, to use the Kabbalistic expression, Pnimius Kesser affects Kitzonius Kesser, and that's the idea of the Gam Haim, that they that they ultimately get positive out of it, and get elevated through that. So this is our teaching, or a deeper teaching in the Parsha Nosa, and why the Parsha Nosa has that's this idea. So that the idea of elevation of the head through, or elevation, the Siyas Arosh, literally meaning counting the people, counting the heads, counting each individual person. This idea of gets reflected that by the service of Kothath, we elevated the head. And that is through, we said, Kothath got counted because of the honor given to the Torah. And in this context, we map that into the words of lifting up the heads of the clans by virtue of the Torah, because Kavod Torah, Kothath lifts up the head, which is the idea of, we said, the innermost intense godly revelations, and that's through the inner will of Hashem that's embedded in the Torah, that elevates that, and that connects also to our external activities, and it lifts up not just Kothath themselves, but lifts up Gershon, the outer parts, our external parts, by lifting up our microcosm, we lift up our macrocosm, we affect the people around us, our family, our neighbors, and into a better state. And through that, we elevate our community, ourselves, and our immediate surroundings. So I hope you enjoyed that the teaching on this Parshas Nosa, and we'll meet again when we in our next class. Thank you.